Hello, it's Tuesday evening. I think it's Tuesday. For the life of me, as I get older, things don't seem to be... I should trust my instincts more, but as you get older, I tell you, things don't just seem to be as easy as they were when we were younger. Why am I posting a second podcast in one day? Yes, I did post earlier, and I am going to post more on separation and just the concerns of minorities in the city of Calgary who face systemic racism. That's another podcast. But today, like the second one for today, has to do with lateral violence and the persistence of rape culture. And the lady from one of the victims of Nathan Chasing Horse had posted something about rape culture, and a lot of people talk about rape culture, and I don't like using the R word. Who knows why I don't, but it's just... I'll read what she wrote. Let's see. It says, in 1924, an Irish jury found the founder that Conor McGregor raped Nikita Hand and was awarded her damages. In 2025, his appeal was dismissed in its entirety. This is not the case where nothing happened. This was not the case where no evidence existed. Nikita Hand gave evidence in court. Medical professional documented her injuries. A paramedic who examined her testified that she had extensive bruises and described the severity of those injuries is unlike anything she had commonly seen. The injuries the jury heard the evidence and reached the verdict. The appeal court later upheld that outcome. And yet today, much of the conversation is about Conor McGregor's comeback, not Nikita Hand, not the violence she described, not the years she spent fighting to be heard. This is how rape culture works, not only through acts of sexual violence themselves, but through the way society responds afterward. A powerful man came to be found liable in court. The survivor can endure years of scrutiny, public attacks, and re-traumatization. Appeals can fail, and still the narrative becomes redemption. Still the public is asked to celebrate. What message does this send to the survivors? If someone can go through the trauma of reporting, the ordeal of a court case, the public scrutiny and the medical examinations, the verdict, the appeal process, and society still acts as though none of it matters, what incentive is this for the next survivor to come forward? Rape culture is not just about violence. It is about whose pain is remembered and whose reputation is protected. This is about a society that treats sexual violence as a temporary inconvenience for powerful men, but a lifetime of burden for the people who are harmed. And the survivors are watching. And I think that sums it up too with my podcast. A lot of times I've gone under a lot of scrutiny in my own life. And so I responded, I said, yes, the lateral violence that persists decades afterwards, in my own personal opinion, serial rapists who terrorized our neighborhood, fear from their victims stopped so many from reporting these two men. Don't experience it from their children and their relatives because I expose them. But it's not I don't experience it. I do experience it. I'm just looking at my typo here. But it's true. You know, out of all the victims, I was the only one that took the serial rapist to court. And because I'm the only one who took the serial rapist to court, and exposed them, the trauma of those 12 women who the RCMP interviewed I cannot imagine. Yet I sought out justice, and the one living predator served time. The following article, like that I just read to you, as it demonstrates why victims refuse to come forward, even now as they are elderly women. Imagine so many who were assaulted and no justice. See, the thing is, too, I think it all stems from Indian residential school, too, because I can't help but tie the knot together or connect the dots. It's because, as children who've been sexually assaulted in those places, either by staff or other children, and it never being reported, and for them to carry that. And then even within my community, like I'll say a dozen women that the RCMP had reported who had said that they were victims of these serial rapists was brought into evidence in my case. And so the judge listened, and they were told that these women refused to come forward and acknowledge that these men were serial rapists. So again, for what? Fear? Maybe a lot of these women were single parents, or maybe they were victims of violence, and if they came forward, maybe their spouses would brutalize them. For whatever reason, the violence, the perpetration, or the misogyny existed and still exists. So I'll use an example. I went to Las Vegas for the Nathan Chasing Horse court case. I had planned to go to see the actual trial, but the reality of it is, like, in 2025, I paid for airline ticket, hotel room, everything. Was ready to go to see the trial, and the trial got delayed. So all that money that I had spent on my own, I had to absorb the losses. And so as I sought out to go and see the trial, it never happened because, again, time is money. Just for me to collect money to go, because I'm a senior now. So I've talked to various women's organizations, and I said to them, I tell them the story, like before I post this on my podcast, I've talked to other women, and one of my childhood friends, because I was like 18, 19, I consider that as a childhood friend. She said to me, after hearing that our chief and counsel had sent 11 people, paid for them to go down on a Saturday and come back on a Tuesday, to one of the victims who lived with Nathan Chasing Horse for about 14 years, was called to testify. Mind you, the courts pay for their testify, right? But to send like 10, 11 people, all expenses paid, to support the victim. Like I have no, I'm grateful they did that because she needed support. The reality of it is, like, I tell the story, not in the sense of like my seeking justice for what. I've been just trying to make people know about what rape culture is, or the R culture. I wish there was a different word to call it because just the act itself is something violent that happens like in a brief period of time. The culture of it is lingering. That's why I don't like using the word. And I don't like the word resilience too, because it says like you're pliable and you can be molded. And no, see, for me, recovery and relapse in being a victim of sexual violence isn't something that just happens in an hour or however long it takes. The same thing too with this young lady from Sutina who stayed with this Nathan Chasing Horse for 14 years. I can't even comprehend that, and I'm grateful she had all the support. But that's not the topic I'm talking about. The topic I'm talking about is that my childhood friend says, Marina, you're an elder now. You've gone down to Las Vegas twice on your own money. Ask the chief and counsel. Ask your chief and counsel who sent these 11 people down. Ask them to reimburse you for your costs. So I did. I sent it off. I didn't receive it. I didn't receive a response until a few days before I went down the second time on April 27th. So I received it, I think, again, it was found in my junk mail, so I didn't see it until like a month later, which had denied me any reimbursement. Now, the lady who sent me the letter is an administrator for the nation, has been working there her entire life, has never worked off reserve. She is the daughter of one of the serial rapists. The other perpetrator, he's dead, and the same with, like, the perpetrator or the daughter of the serial rapist, her mother has passed. The nature of it is I'm trying to say that I was friends with this particular woman's mother. And the mother and I had discussions about rape culture, and I had expressed to her that it's important for women to defend themselves physically in any other way. She didn't get the opportunity to bear witness that I took her husband to court and he served time. The poor woman was, like, throughout her whole life, this man brutalized her. I mean, one time, her and my cousin and I were walking through, we were bar hopping, and the bar we were walking through, this man, this serial rapist, was sitting there, and I didn't know. We were just walking through, and she pushed us, me and my cousin. Let's go, get out of here. And we're going, why? And we went out the door, just listening to her. And she said, he's here. And I thought, what? Like, it didn't even dawn on me, because I'm not looking for this person, her ex-husband. He chased her across the street and brutally beat her, kicking her in her head with his boots. My cousin and I were screaming for help. Men came running to her assistance. They tried to drag that man off of her. The only reason I believe he beat her to a pulp was because I was with her. The evidence of this man trying to keep people quiet for what he did to me persisted for decades. I can only imagine the wives of these serial rapists who had, like, they're obviously the brutality that they faced in their relationships, their marriage. They had children with these men. And the reality of that, there was over a dozen other women. I was supposedly the youngest of the victims, that they had to endure all this within the community. I don't know the names of the other victims. I suspect some of them, but not all of them. And unless they come forward, only one of the victims came forward and told me. And but what I'm bringing to the account here is the cousins and the nephews and the nieces and everybody trying to protect their uncles who were serial rapists within my community still persisted for decades. I think that's why, like, when I alerted the case about my niece, nobody wanted to listen. You know, it's like they just violently or systemically put me in a class where, like, oh, she's calling wolf again. You know, this woman who pretended that she had been a victim of my relatives. That is systemic. That is systemic. You know, the perpetration or the lateral violence of people who want to keep everything hushed and quiet and keep all that lateral violence in a society where it's acceptable to fawn and it's acceptable to have limerence. All these things are acceptable and enabled because somebody's hiding something. Somebody doesn't want somebody to be exposed. And so, yeah, I started my blog because, decades. I started my blog, 20 years ago. And 30 years ago, I took this person to court and he served time. That's 30 years ago. I was sexually assaulted 54 years ago. So understand that 24 years had passed before I went to court. But understand those 24 years, I had the violence, the lateral violence towards me as an indigenous single woman. I will post a picture of myself, how I looked when I was 23. I tried to start a daycare so I could have a place to stay as a single woman. Daycare center so I could be the janitor. Brought in, I think, probably $100,000 to hire and renovate. That came through. Didn't ask for a penny. All I asked for was a place to stay in the basement after it was renovated, and I was denied that because I was a single woman without children. Okay, so, and again, you kind of wonder, like, why do people want to have young women married off so young at 15 and 16? At 24 to 25, I developed, again, volunteered because the violence that was projected towards my mother to produce a proposal for a detox treatment center, which I helped her with. Again, I didn't get paid. Again, when the money came in, I forget how many hundreds of thousands came in, the house was renovated. Again, I asked if I could be the janitor, so I'd have a place to stay and clean the place. Again, I was denied, and by that time, the chief and council, again, relatives of these serial rapists, had put a proposal in. I think the proposal may have died out maybe a decade ago, or during the time of BBC Black Bear Crossing and all that commotion of so many homeless or young people who didn't have homes, like how poverty-stricken Sutina was. They had put out a proposal. I think that's when it vanished, when they stopped this. But for decades, this proposal existed in our housing that no woman age 55 and younger who had no children, had no partner, could apply for a house or even live on their own in my community. Like, I'm 74. Understand this, when I was like in my 30s, I couldn't even apply for a house in my community. I had tried 2 times to get a place to stay in my 20s. And people understand, what did you get educated in? Like, as if like I'm supposed to wear this badge of education and like you didn't amount to anything. Why? Because I don't have my own home? No, because of lateral violence. The amount of things that I volunteered for throughout my life to learn things about my own sexuality, my own understanding of what lateral violence is, and how this culture of violence, of misogyny, even exists and permeates today. Like even when I go in, I'm offered tobacco to pray, and I have to say to the organizers, watch out, protect me. When I'm in a group having conversations about such topics as rape culture, systemic racism, some of the young people still have a lot of trauma. Either they have an unresolved trauma towards their grandmothers, their mothers, their aunties, their sisters, ex-lover. I come into the room, I trigger them, and they project all that on me. Misogyny. And they're brutal. They're brutal in their conversations towards me. And one of the witnesses, one of the liaisons, he's a Métis man, I said to him, "Did you see how they treated me?" And he said, "Yes." He said, "Any elder would have just walked out." I said, "But I'm not any elder." You know, the amount of protagonists that I've had to battle that are just indigenous within themselves. I want non-indigenous people to understand this. When you are racist towards me, and you pretend to be my friend, and you take advantage, and then you make a living or something off of what I say to you, and I learned my lesson. Like, you're not a good ally or a cohort. That's nothing. That hurt that you inflicted on me is nothing compared to the hurt that I get inflicted on by my own people, indigenous people, because of this systemic. For non-indigenous people, it's systemic racism. But for indigenous people, it's lateral violence, misogyny against women who speak up about rape culture. And so, for example, like I said, I did the proposal, spent about $5,000 of my own money to do and witness anything regarding this trial with Nathan Chasing Horse. had all my invoices, all my receipts, everything, submitted it, was rejected. We do not help people out in court. And yet they sent 11 people a month before down to Las Vegas, Nevada. Understand this too. I'm talking about lateral violence. I lived in the United States on my own, paid for my own education, worked full time. Didn't ask chief and counsel for no money. Even when there was death or dying, I spent my own money coming home and going back. And yet the followers of Nathan Chasing Horse, protected by different leadership within the community who perpetrate this rape culture, paid for the rent of these children who were 15 and 16 years old. And all the other followers of Nathan Chasing Horse who were renting in Las Vegas, they paid for their rent off reserve. Even when Nathan Chasing Horse was arrested, they paid for all those victims to come back to Sutina with their children. Nathan Chasing Horse was a cult leader that was supported by many leaderships, not just in my community, but other communities throughout Canada, the United States. The extent of who he was supported by in terms of hotel casinos where they were trafficking indigenous girls out of is horrendous. He's a monster. But yet all these people who enabled him are still monsters as well. Even if they don't want to really take a look at it, they are. I received an email from this lady, the administrator, who denied my request. And also she had CC'd that copied, carbon copied to 4 other managers. And I'm wondering, why are you making my application for reimbursement so public? This was a private request, not directed to this administrator. I directed my request to the chief and to a band counselor and a different band administrator. And yet a lady who wasn't on my email returned the response that they weren't going to help me out. Now, I'm not crying over spilt milk. I've had my battle scars with volunteering in my community. Like I said, I helped design and develop the first daycare center and the first detox treatment center without pay. I've never been voted on as chief and counsel, as a band member. I was education director at one time, and even then, when they wanted to let me go after hours and hours of overtime, the budgets I was handling over $1.2 million, I refused the transfer. I refused the transfer to be manager because I knew if I had accepted it, I would be obligated to that leadership who offered me this job to be their yes person. Whatever they said, I would be obligated to obey this person if I took that transfer, and I refused. I just chose to settle out of court. So there is a difference in terms of what's acceptable and what isn't. And a lot of I believe women who are victims of violence who work in our communities accepted those plea deals and accepted to perform and say yes at every beck and call. I haven't, and I never will. At least I knock on wood. I try to explain that to people, even when they say, ask them to reimburse you. I try to explain the situation. It's self-defeating in the sense that I'm trying to explain the situation, that no matter what I do, this lateral violence of who I am perceived to be. I'm perceived to be the woman who called wolf when there was no wolf. But see, the reality was there was a wolf, 2 of them. They were serial wolves. Violating the one died at age 27 from alcoholism. The effect that they had on a generation of women in my community. I talk about it, and even though the rest of the women in my community refuse to believe it, or some of them have married off and come back later and wonder, what did you amount to, Marina Crane? I'm going, I am who I am. If you do not like me, hey, that's fine. I'm just grateful that there are people out there like yourselves in my audience who are not Indigenous, who have this empathy or sympathy towards me. However, I got to warn you too. I'm very well aware of non-Indigenous people pretending to be my friends. I've gone through decades of friendships that I've had to just say goodbye to because of that. And there are also friendships that I say goodbye to, not because they've hurt me in any way. It was just friendships that are meant for a short time, and lessons learned and embraced and released. So, but I wanted to say this to you, like that. No matter what I do, it's like racism. Racism will die only when the racists die. And it's the same thing with people who are laterally violent towards me, who, because they're protecting their relatives, some who are still alive and some who've died, keeping their image of like being this ideal person, like living their ghost. I mean, I'm not saying, like, I'll use an example. My uncle died, 1978, the same year as my dad. And even my father, like they're ghosts. When people talk about ghosts, I'm going, no, this is the definition of what a ghost is. When the loved ones perpetrate or create a story or a narrative about the individual of who they were when they were alive, whether or not it's a true narrative, and glorifying them, like even after death. Like my question is, like, why weren't you glorifying them when they were alive? And like, I live with that legacy, and it's the same thing with lateral violence, especially with men who are so violent, and that their families have to keep up that ghost of them, that they were, fathers and they had children, and look at their legacy, and like they poor things, without ever looking at the victims. So this article in Facebook about this fellow who's supposedly some celebrity who again, Nikita Han gave evidence in court, medical professional documents of her injuries. A paramedic who examined her testified that she had extensive bruises and described the severity of her injuries unlike anything she had commonly seen. The jury heard the evidence and reached its verdict. See, the thing is, that's the whole point. Even in the sentencing of Nathan Chasing Horse, his lawyer was still saying there were no bruises on these victims. On these victims, these three women, they were girls at the time, they were children at the time, and the judge says to Nathan's lawyer, they were bruises. I saw the photos. Like, and even for me, the 20 scars I have in my head, the medical records of the concussion I received from being attacked by this one man who's still alive. Mind you, I'm not. But maybe this is a warning too on restorative justice. This elderly man, serial rapist, has no friends in my community. Everybody knows him. They know he served time. Pitiful man, in the understanding of what pitiful means. He goes into the city every day, has coffee at this automotive shop. Total, Indigenous guy, sitting there talking to various white men who come in to get their vehicles fixed every day. That's his social connection. Because people have shunned him in my community. Even though he served time, 2 years. He served years for me. That's the reality. All those dozens of women who never took him to court. Imagine the stories. I can't even imagine or can't even comprehend that this man is shunned so much. He has no life in our community, but yet he lives here. That's restorative justice. That's transformative and restorative justice, because perpetrators have to come back to our communities, and rather than being violent towards the perpetrator, they're just shunned. They exist, they have their home, they live, no violence towards them. But the amount of emotional damage that I can't even comprehend to all those victims that never came forward, that live in my community to this day, that tell their narrative to their children and their grandchildren. The shame and guilt that this administrator must feel, knowing that people in our community know what her father is like. I have no ill will towards her, none whatsoever. Because there's no connection. I don't get a paycheck from her. My life doesn't revolve around her. I'm totally detached from her. And yet she persists on treating me with indignation, trying to make me a public view. And again, I asked to get reimbursed. I had started a GoFundMe a couple of years ago just to go down. I think I only received $200. But everything I've done to get the word out about the story and the life of Nathan Chasing Horse. The fact is, he's a sociopath, born with a different nervous system. Obviously, something happened violently towards him. His parents were both drug dealers, or drug pushers, we'll call them. I don't think they were sophisticated enough to be dealers. And just the spiritual context of cultural hoarders or cultural thieves, where them and some other Sioux people, started perpetuating sweats and Sundance and selling culture, to the point where when the white buffalo was born, they raised over, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of dollars, and Nathan's father was to take that money to the rancher so the rancher could dig a well in his property to make sure that white buffalo survived. En route to deliver that money, the highway patrol arrested him and charged him with drug possession. So everything, by the time Nathan was 18 to 21, the crimes or the violence that his parents had created for him, it wasn't an environment of safety. At 15 years old, the amount of money he made for Dances with Wolves, the celebrity status. I think his daughter, by the time I met him, he had an 18-year-old daughter. So he probably became a father by the time he was 15 and 16, around the same time he was in the movie Carried My Heart at Wounded Knee. Just because of status, like people wanting to be around this man to escape their poverty, and his parents enabling and just the perpetration or the narrative that they sent and created around him. His followers created this story that he was born enlightened, that the parents would put him, they didn't have enough money to have a bassinet or a crib, so they put him in the drawer of their closet, and that's where he slept. And when they put him to sleep in the drawer of their closet, they turn off the lights, and then the next thing you know, the lights were turned on because he was such a powerful psychic. This is the narrative his followers and family created. He was the song and dance man. He was traveling snake oil salesman. So, his followers had this narrative and this fairy tale story built up around him. Even to the point where he was going through his rite of passage, had to go into his first Uwepi ceremony as the person who's getting wrapped up, because he went and stayed at Bear Butte for 4 days and 4 nights without food and water. And during that time, the narrative is lightning struck, and he had this vision of this being visiting him and that it scared him so much that when he came off the mount and when his father went to go get him, there was a white streak in his hair. Again, I have a first cousin who has a white streak in her hair. She was born that way. So everything that could fit a false narrative of a fairy story of somebody who was a powerful psychic was part of the narrative. And understand this too. Nathan's parents are a little younger than me, and understand this too. Because of poverty, a lot of white people, like from Michigan, Mackinac Island, Michigan, with the Oxford group, the group called Moral Rearmament. They did dance troupes like the Young Canadians. All this, they were a cult. And they recruited a lot of Native Americans from Canada, the United States. And my community, even before Nathan Chasing Horse came here, over a dozen went to Mackinac Island, Michigan to be indoctrinated. My father was one of them, and as a result of him being a good little Indian, he was sent to South American India to promote moral rearmament. I was a child of 8 and 10. But it's the same narrative that was created, and so the narrative is that there is a Native American in North America who's going to lead or become a leader. That was the propaganda of cohorts, non-Indigenous, we'll say white people, creating a narrative for their own gain. Just like Danielle Smith and her separation story. She had an investigative reporter write her speeches. She befriended Indigenous people in Alberta, and then look at what she did. Same old, systemic racist. Like I said, they created a narrative for a lot of Native American people, and a lot of Native American people bought into the story that there was going to be a Native American, Indigenous, First Nations, Métis, Inuit person who was going to climb up the ladders and be a leader to show the entire world that they killed off 5 generations of our children the first 100 years of colonization, covering up so much, creating their own narrative, and again using money and their influence, and like I said, the traveling snake oil person, creating a narrative, come one, come all, heralding a story when there's no TV and no social media that, this is going to happen. So a lot of Native Americans who lived in poverty truly believed there was going to be a prophet or some leader. So, of course, Nathan Chasing Horse was raised in this false narrative, this systemic racist ideology, because, just like me, I grew into it, and I had to dismantle and deconstruct and understand my situation. And so I talk about Indian residential school as being a cult, then my parents being in an Anglican church, especially with those who were perpetrators, and silenced them to not report being sexually assaulted, or the brutality of just the neglect, like my father being in an attic with dead children's bodies, my mother suppressing what had happened to her by this fat, ugly teacher, just the student-on-student violence, and never, ever thinking there was going to be any kind of restitution or bear witness to the injustice. The fellow that, this European fellow, I gifted him a gift, and I said, what you bore witness in the sentencing of Nathan Chasing Horse, and the narrative that I've created, like in my podcast, or anything that I've said to him, was to bear witness that he cannot ever deny the structure of this whole rape culture, how it persists in genocide. So, it just perpetrates. And when you talk about truth and reconciliation, it has to start within the communities to have this narrative about the injustices that still persist. And again, just like I said with racists, those old racists have to die for it to stop. But it's the same thing too with patriarchy. And this even goes deeper to all those non-Indigenous people who, just believe they're so democratic, like Danielle Smith. I've had so many. My whole life, I've been around white people. Like I have white uncles, and just even like the cults. Trying to make sure that I buy into the system, and then they turn around and use it against me and the community and other people. So yes, you can understand why it's so hard to trust white people. It's so difficult because, again, it takes time to step back and see if they've hurt or if they're going to hurt me. And again, my late dad used to say, I've been shot at, kicked at, and every other at. That was his saying, and that's the analogy with when it comes to just the lateral violence. That no matter what you do, no matter how many degrees you have, no matter how much you advocate for the victims of violence, there will still be people who are jealous of you. Still people who think that there's something the matter with you, that you still follow Nathan Chasing Horse. And like I said to my cousin, I said, he says to me, Marina, after doing the Fifth Estate, he says, people still contacted me who still follow Nathan Chasing Horse. And I said to him, yes, of course. I said one of his followers took out a mortgage so that Nathan Chasing Horse's parents could live there. I said, talk about people still following Nathan Chasing Horse. Like I said, he's a sociopath. And in his cult and his rituals of abuse and lateral violence that he indoctrinated into his followers, he created a whole bunch of sociopaths, people who follow him, even now that he's serving life in prison. And I try to be as non-clinical as I can in terms of psychology to warn people about such young people who have a psychological problem. They don't care about who they hurt. I don't know about the psychology of the 2 serial rapists that grew up in my community. I don't know if they're sociopaths or psychopaths. But I do know the nature and the horrors and just the extent of, from the amount of time that I'd been talking about Nathan Chasing Horse, 20 years of him taking photographs of children that he's sexually assaulted. I mean, you got to sort of, look at it this way. The FBI and the state were going to charge him. The state stepped in. The first cases were dropped by the Supreme Court of Nevada. It's the videos and what they found and the people who came forward to help them in the investigation that got him serving life in prison, in penitentiary. I think just the reality of people who are trying to get this man released from prison. This is a man who came into communities and ravaged monies from leadership. Like I said, these young women were paid their rent for decades. Even when he was arrested, the leadership paid for the members who were following Nathan, living with him in Las Vegas, paid for them to move back to Sutina. Yes, and of course, they don't want to reimburse me for my airline ticket and hotel room. They'd sooner cover their tracks or appease the victims of Nathan Chasing Horse in the case they don't sue them. Understand this: if I was rich and I had money, I would sue the chief and counsel. If I were one of the victims of Nathan Chasing Horse, if I was related to, if my nieces or my own daughter had been a victim of Nathan Chasing Horse, I would spend money to sue the chief and counsel for not protecting my children, for paying and enabling him to thrive and take money from our community. I'm just one nation member, a female, that they've been wanting to silence for decades about rape culture. So understand this. Yes, of course. People say, well, why did you do it? How did you spot Nathan Chasing Horse? Because I've, advocated. I was never in denial that I was brutally assaulted. But the amount of sacrifice that I've had to do just for my own life, for my own protection. Yeah, people say, well, why didn't you ever get married? Well, if I did, and I had to be with any man who would want to silence me, not to say speak up against leadership, not for their politics or anything, but just for the lack of support in any kind of victim services. We all live in this charade or this fantasy of delusion or illusion based on self-defeating behaviors. In psychology, it's a hard thing to muster. But we have so many therapists and people who believe like they're God-sent because they're educated, or they've worked in forensics for decades, or they've been therapists to First Nations people for decades. And yet when you have people who are actually healing, and they look and they say, how did they heal? And I explain it in my podcast, the Yawipi ceremony, and how it was originally used for thousands of years is in our DNA, and the reality of like why we have the clan system the way we did, especially like for the Sioux tribe, how genetically we're different, and for people, especially immigrants who come into Canada, who think that there's something the matter with us, and they want to take away our charitable monies, or that they think that we're not there, like we're so helpless, that why are people still nonprofit organizations funding us? And this is in the city, and the perpetuating this systemic racism, even though they are people like from they're people, immigrants that are not white, okay, that come into the community, that buy into this colonial construct of what Indigenous people are. Decades ago, I was at a motel, and it was run by foreigners, and it was awful. Like, they were just awful towards me. And I just stood my ground, and I said, I know enough about your culture to know that you have many goddesses, many figurines that you pray to. That your culture, your religion has female gods. I said, and yet you treat women like this? You talk to women like this? I said, imagine if there were no women at all in the world, because you believe that men are like the superior race, that women are no less than cattle. I said to them, imagine, and pardon my audience, but this is my narrative. I said to them, imagine, who would you be fucking? If there were no women in the world, who would you be having sex with? I said, you'd be fucking yourselves. Like, that's the reality. The G-spot in the man is between the scrotum and the anus. Why is it? Patriarchy's been only around for 3,000 years. Matriarchy has been around since the beginning of time. And for me, as an Indigenous woman who's a matriarch, I can say that, yes, I can go my whole life, five decades, without being sexually active. Yes, I still find men attractive. I'm not asexual. I don't have some sort of mental health illness that prevents me from seeking out sexual partners. I explain that to various people because it's important that when you make a decision, especially I'm around a lot of older white women who've been raised their whole lives under patriarchy, and the struggle to be single, being an elderly woman, and having community, and the fear and the anxiety because you've served your man in a patriarchal system your whole life is scary. And to reach out to other women to try and have some stability for the last half of your life. See, I understand that. I understand that completely. I have my neighbors, I have my family, I have relatives. In my community of matriarchs, I have this. I knew that when I lived in the States. I had to come back and I had to heal. And in a collective, holistic approach in the various family groups within my community, and the experience that each person has within their own ceremony is very powerful, because it's a collective and holistic approach. When people gather in ceremony, and what they experience is the experience of seeing and hearing energies. And in my podcast earlier, I talked about Yoko Ono and her piece and what energy means. And this was in the 70s. This is what, in the 2000s now, and we're just openly talking about energies. And for me, being so naive about it, talking to indigenous artists who've gone through ceremonies and who've felt like these energies coming into the room. See, Nathan Chasing Horse bastardized all that. When people came into the room and they heard buffalo, they heard elk, and they heard eagles, and that was people, the people in the group, in that darkness, the energy, that's what they were reading and sensing, is that energy as a collective, a holistic approach. Wasn't the man, Nathan Chasing Horse, was not his followers. Yes, of course, the followers did do trickery, the same with Nathan Chasing Horse, to embellish what already exists naturally. Oh my goodness, like how much more specific can I get? It's nothing you can buy or sell. It's just something that, as a holistic collective, people come together to pray and heal in ceremony and ritual. Whatever that is, a sweat, Yuwipi, Sundance, pipe ceremony, whatever the people come together, and whatever they experience in gathering that energy is what it's all about. If people don't understand that and want to put themselves on a pedestal as if they're holy, fine, my hat's off to you. I was raised as a holy child because my name is Hapa. My older brother was Cheskea. There were so many Hapas and Cheskea in the Dakota culture when you're being raised that you thought everybody was talking about you, that you were somebody special. That's what makes a holy person. People say, oh, well, she's so egotistical, like whatever. What stops her? No, it's by the time I was 5 years old, you can't undo that. It's stuck like a clay piece. That identity of matriarchy is embedded for the rest of my life. So in honoring my ancestors and my parents and all of the culture, I talk about this, and I scrutinize Nathan Chasing Horse, because what was he trying to do? All those, I'm just grateful that he wasn't around as many children under the age of 5. The horrors of what this man did to children, 10 years old, 13 years old. People can continually follow him and do what they want to do. But, there were predictions. There were predictions. You always have to look at subcultures or minority cultures, and usually people will look at people on reserves, Inuit colonies, Métis colonies, and you'll see, something happening, percolating to the top. And it's only a reflection of greater society. I mean, Nathan took one of the girls and put her with that actor, Steven Seagal, who, had them doing massages like Epstein Island. You have people in positions of power that have gotten so tired of healthy human sexuality that the only way they could actually get sexually aroused is to scare children. By the time I knew Nathan Chasing Horse, he was already addicted to scaring children in ceremony. And he would, it got to the point where he was sexually aroused. That's why it's so important as women, if you're a victim of violence with your husbands, you need to, we'll say, decolonize yourself. You need to look at it and go, realize he is being sexually aroused when he inflicts pain on you. This is a grown man inflicting pain on another human being and being sexually aroused. Now take that to Nathan Chasinghorse doing that to children and being sexually aroused. You can even, there's documentation of that too with Prince Andrew or even Jeffrey Epstein or all these adults who do this to our children. So I'm saying, like, you can project all your hate towards minorities. But the reality of it is we have a story to tell. And as it percolates to the top and you understand, like, ritual abuse has been around since the beginning of time, what you're seeing is only a result of thousands of years of this ritual abuse percolating to the top or being hidden in this rape culture, in this I don't want to use rape culture, hidden in this scheme of family violence, what it is to be in a sexual relationship, who dominates who. Yet it all has to do with energy. And again, I'll refer back to Yoko Ono and John Lennon. All you need is love. The energy of love and how it persists and is inherited into us for thousands of years. Why can't we just see it as that simple and that beautiful? But we have to understand we were born into this system. We have to have the courage to challenge it, to hold space for people like myself talking about this, and to bear witness to the injustice. That's all I've been doing the past couple of decades, even before Nathan Chasinghorse came into my community. I used to sit on the Native Women's Emergency Shelter Board. All these things I've done, try to understand my own behavior and coming to the epiphany or the aha moment where I'm going, oh, okay, this is what it means. So I'm grateful, and I want to bear out to my friends, my white female friend and my white male friend. You give me balance. I appreciate the insight and the support you give me, and the fact that you think that and believe that everything I say has some relevance to what's happening in the world today. So that's the reason I did the second podcast in one day. I'm going to be talking to a lady about the minorities in Calgary and the fight for nonprofit organization money and how the system is using this to separate people of color to fight amongst each other. Again, the separation of the Canadian Alberta government it goes really deep into people, minority people. So that being said, I'm just grateful I have the opportunity to put this out there, and hopefully it'll give you some insight into the workings and the whole beauty of what my culture was like before settlers came 500 years ago. And the reality of it is like, I'm 74. So if you take a look at it, even with my grandparents, that's not long ago. That is not long ago. So I'll close my podcast off, and please do what you can, getting the word out. It's important.